What do a t-shirt, a chocolate bar, and a smartphone all have in common? Most of us buy these products or use them without thinking twice about where they come from. But hidden behind these everyday items are millions of children working long hours in farms, factories, mines, and workshops. Today, I want to talk about child labor, a problem that affects millions of children all around the world. And this problem is more connected to our lives than we realize. To help us better understand this issue, I created a mind map that breaks child labor into 6 different sections. What child labor is, why it happens, the different forms it takes, its effects on children, how to identify it, and the possible solutions. By exploring each one of these areas, we can gain a deeper understanding of why child labor continues to exist and how we can stop it. So, what is child labor? The problem begins when work starts to take away from a child's childhood. So, according to UNICEF, child labor is work that children are too young to do, or work that's dangerous and harmful to their health, safety, education, and development. Just think about it for a moment. Having to choose between going to school and earning money for your family, imagine spending your day working instead of learning, playing sports, or hanging out with your friends, or just simply being a kid. For millions of children around the world, that isn't a choice, it's the reality. In other words, it's work that takes away the freedom to be learning, to grow, and to simply be a child. And once we understand that, it changes how we look at the issue completely because child labor isn't just about children working, it's about their childhood being taken away. Now that we understand the meaning of child labor, I want to move on to the next branch of my mind map, which is the causes. So, child labor is not caused by one singular issue, it's the result of multiple factors that overlap, creating conditions where children become vulnerable to exploitation. One of the most significant causes of child labor is poverty. In many parts of the world, families are living in extreme financial hardship where income is not enough to even cover basic necessities like food, clean water, shelter, or healthcare. In these situations, survival becomes the priority because families might rely on every possible source of income, including their children. Even if a child earns very little, that small amount can be essential for the household. This is what pushes many children into these workforces at a very young age. Another major cause is lack of access to education. In some regions, schools are too far away, they're poorly funded, overcrowded, or simply they're just unavailable. In other cases, education comes with costs that family just can't afford. When education becomes inaccessible, children lose one of the most important pathways out of poverty. Without school, work becomes the default option, and once a kid leaves their education, returning becomes extremely difficult. And this is how the cycle begins. Limited education leads to child labor, and child labor then prevents future education, trapping children in the same conditions as adults. Discrimination and inequality also play a major role. Children from marginalized communities already face fewer opportunities and less protection, and gender can also influence the type of work that children are pushed into, with girls often likely to be in domestic labor and boys are likely to be sent into physically dangerous industries. To make this more real, I wanted to share a brief example about a 13-year-old girl named Saray Neong, and she lives in Cambodia with her family inside of a brick factory, and that's also where they work. Saray has a dream of becoming a teacher, but her daily life is shaped by poverty and just so much responsibility. After school, she goes straight to the factory to help her mother by doing physically demanding labor, and her family relies on her income to survive. And there's even a possibility that she may have to leave school because they can't afford the cost of her education. Saray's story just shows how poverty and lack of opportunity can force children into work even when they still have dreams for their own future. Now that we understand why child labor happens, let's move on to the next branch of my mind map, which is the different forms that it takes. About 61% of child labor happens in agriculture. This is where it includes work on farms, where children may plant, harvest, and carry heavy loads, often in extreme weather conditions. The second most common form is services, which makes up about 27%. This includes domestic works in homes, selling goods in markets, or working on the streets. The remaining 13% happens in industries such as construction, factories, and mining, where there's often dangerous work environments. No matter the form, child labor often puts children at risk. Many are exposed to unsafe conditions, long hours, and miss out on education and healthcare. And depending on where they live, children can be pushed into different types of work, but the impact is always the same. Their safety and childhood are affected, and this makes you think about something deeper because the type of work matters, but what it does to a child is even more. Now we'll move on to the next branch of my mind map, which is the effects on children. The impact of child labor has serious and often lifelong harm to their health, safety, and development. According to global estimates, around 73 million children are involved in hazardous work, meaning that work directly endangers their health and safety. These conditions can lead to serious injuries, illnesses, permanent disabilities, and in some cases, death. In fact, the International Labor Organization estimates that around 22,000 children die every year as a result of work-related accidents. One of the most dangerous areas is agriculture, something that we've talked about before. This is where most child labor takes place. Children may be exposed to harmful pesticides, dangerous tools, and long hours in extreme weather conditions, but the risks are not limited to farming. Children in mining, constructions, factories, and domestic work can face unsafe machinery, heavy lifting, toxic substances, extreme temperatures, and even isolation where abuse is harder to detect. Another serious issue is that children are just more vulnerable than adults. Their bodies and minds are still developing, which means that exposure to dangerous environments can cause damage that they may not even see until later in life. Child labor can also have long-term effects that continue into adulthood, including diseases like cancer. There's also a strong mental health impact, and many children experience stress, trauma, and emotional harm, especially those exposed to unsafe or abusive working conditions. Now I'll be moving on to the next branch of my mind map, which is how to identify child labor. So instead of focusing on more statistics, I want to clarify something that's actually really important in understanding this issue. And it's not all work is done by children is considered child labor. And this distinction matters because child labor is defined based on harm, age, and conditions, not simply the fact that a child is working. For example, some work can be part of your normal development. Light chores at home, helping a family business for a short amount of time, or a small part-time job that doesn't interfere with school or health are generally not considered child labor. The problem begins when work becomes harmful and demanding or unsafe, or when it comes to prevent a child from going to school and developing properly. International organizations like the ILO define child labor based on these factors, especially focusing on whether the work affects a child's education, health, or development. This means that child labor is not defined by a single job or industry, but by the conditions it's surrounding itself in. Things like long hours, dangerous environments, or exposure to chemicals are all factors. Understanding this distinction is important because it shows that child labor is not always easy to recognize from the outside. Two children might both be working, but only one might be working in conditions that are considered harmful or exploitive. This leads me to my final question and the last part of my mind map, which is what can actually be done to change child labor? It's important to understand that child labor isn't just a problem for individual families. It's also connected to global systems, governments, and even products that we buy every day. One major approach is the government action. For example, in 2023, Canada passed Bill 211, known as the Fighting Against Forced Labor and Child Labor in Supply Chain Act. This law requires Canadian companies to investigate and report whether their products or materials are linked to forced labor or child labor. The goal is to increase transparency and reduce the chance that goods being sold in Canada are connected to exploitation. Solutions don't only come from governments. Consumers can also play a role. When people are aware of what products may be linked to exploitation, they can make more informed choices, such as supporting more ethically sourced or ethically made goods. And when consumers start paying attention, companies are more likely to change their practices. So, while child labor is a global issue, the solution also exists on many different levels. From governments creating laws to companies improving transparency to individuals making more conscious choices. And that's what brings everything together. Understanding the issue is important, but responding to it is what creates change. When I started this, I asked what a t shirt, a chocolate bar, and a smartphone all have in common. And now that question feels different because it's not just about the products themselves, but it's about the systems behind them. And the fact that in some cases, those systems include children who are working instead of learning. Child labor continues to exist because it's tied to real life pressures, but it also continues because it often goes unnoticed, hidden in places that are easy to overlook. And that means awareness really matters. The more we understand what's behind what we consume, the harder it becomes to ignore. So the question that we're left with is simple but important. When we look at the things that we use every day, what are we willing to look closer at? That's all for my TED Talk, and I hope that you learned something meaningful.